Looking at the president interacting with those two leaders, the contrast between the way he spoke of Kim Jong-un and the way he is speaking of Justin Trudeau, what is your reaction?
Well, greetings from Vancouver, Canada, where I am now. It's not just tweets, it's not just words. Yesterday, the Trump Commerce Department announced new tariffs on Canadian newsprint. Now, that was done at the behest of an American private equity firm that had overpaid for a paper mill in Washington State, and they found they couldn't make money at the price they paid. And so to bail out that firm, and we may find some interesting things about the connection between that firm and Wilbur Ross, but to bail out that firm, sanctions have been put on Canadian newsprint, which will have the effect, and this gives you an idea of how interdependent these two countries are. Yes, that will hurt people in the Canadian pulp and paper industry. It also will have a devastating effect on every American newspaper that publishes still a print edition, and every journalist whose works appear on paper. You can't hurt Canada without hurting the United States, and vice versa.
So do you think that that was part of this? I mean, could Donald Trump have known about that?
I have no idea. I can't imagine it was done on 24 hours notice, but it's an example of the settled intent of the Trump administration to move in a more protectionist direction. And that intent, what is so disturbing about it, and the reason Prime Minister Trudeau referred to these tariffs as insulting, is the president doesn't actually have the authority to slap tariffs on everything. Tariffs are governed by statute and by treaty. Donald Trump gets this authority by invoking the national security exemption, to be able to say this import from Canada poses a threat to the national security of the United States. And here's why that's insulting. Since the Eisenhower administration, Canada and the United States have had a single market in defense procurement. That is, a Canadian-made, every American weapon has a Canadian component in it, almost virtually, and almost all Canadian components come from the United States. It's one market. And Canadian prime ministers have taken political heat for that. Justin Trudeau's father was prime minister during the Vietnam War. Many people in Canada at that time demanded an embargo on Canadian arms exports to the United States. And the elder Trudeau had to explain Canada did not have the authority to do that. Canada is integrated into the U.S. single defense procurement market, and if a Canadian firm bids on an American contract, the government of Canada has no power to stop it. That's how close the defense relationship is. And Donald Trump is now saying, despite that, national security means the United States can't buy Canadian pulp and paper.
But let's also talk about the numbers here, because the president keeps saying that there's a trade deficit with Canada, when in reality there is a trade surplus when you look at goods and services with Canada. There is much more of a deficit when you look at China, considerably more of a deficit when you look at China. So it's the highest, frankly. So why is Trump going after Justin Trudeau and Canada, where we have a surplus, and trying to revive a Chinese telecoms company, ZTE?
Yeah. Well, first, because it's easy and because he can. And second, I think one of the reasons that Donald Trump has a problem with America's rule of law partners is China just granted approval to a lot of Ivanka Trump trademarks, and they seem to expedite that. Now, Canada has a trademark authority, too, as does Germany and as does Britain. If the leaders of any of those countries called the trademark authority and said, could we speed up the Ivanka Trump trademarks to help our relationship with the United States, the trademark authority, they wouldn't take the call. The local police would be called. The prime minister would be arrested and let off in handcuffs. In rule of law countries, you cannot deliver a trademark as a favor. But in China, you can. One other thing to consider, because, and I understand why you want to counter the president's disinformation. It's also trade deficits and surpluses in goods are a really meaningless way to think about the economic relationship. Canada's #1 exports to the United States are energy. America's exports to Canada are dominated by technology and by food. Sometimes the price of energy is high, in which case Canada has losses. Sometimes trade deficits. The point is, it's silly in any given year to say, how does this relationship work in terms of deficit and surplus? The question is, over the long run, are these two countries growing together in prosperity and peace? This relationship is obviously a dramatic success. It's a $1 trillion a year trading relationship. It's bigger. The trade between Canada and the United States is bigger than the economy of almost any other country on earth.